Hi everyone, this is AC7WH here, and I was originally going to make this a live video because I like the screen sharing feature with the go live on YouTube, but turns out I've never made a live video before, and so I have to wait 24 hours before I can actually get approved to do one. But in the meantime, you know what? I want to go ahead and do this video. So I'm going to show you a couple simple things that can be the difference between whether you're on the air with a QSO versus having to repair your antenna system or at least reassemble it versus being able to stay on the air and continue with your QSO. And then I'm going to talk about some simple ways to be able to have a nice antenna without having to worry about quite so many expensive factors that may play into getting some actual marketed manufactured items for an antenna. In other words, some ways that you can make your own antenna, which some ham radio operators say is always the best way. And I can definitely appreciate that. Okay, so first of all, I was in the middle of a QSO a week ago, and all of a sudden I noticed on my amplifier and on my antenna tuner, both by Palstar, that the SWR shot up abruptly. And it's a good idea to be watching for those things whenever you have an antenna tuner or if you have especially a high power amplifier, because it usually means something's wrong. Now, thankfully, Palstar does an excellent job of having protection circuitry in both the amplifier and in the antenna tuner, and also ICOM does with their IC7300 transceiver that I have. But in any case, I found out what the problem was. It was this: a simple lock washer. Why was that the problem? Well, the lock washer was between the adapter for my Chameleon antenna and my SuperPod tripod for the SO239 coax connector. I actually have the tripod handy here. I'll grab that. Here it is. SuperPod TM4. Relatively nice tripod specifically for this sort of thing. And I have the SO239 connector under there. You can see that. But the weakness was right in this area. So that lock washer used to go between this nut and this insulator to try to prevent the nut from coming loose. Now, you don't want to over tighten anything on here, because if you over tighten this, at least you can start crushing that insulator, and if the insulator breaks, then you'd be shorting out the antenna, and that's not good news either. But with that lock washer there, the threads that are inside, let's see if you can see this. There you go. It's a pretty good view. So the part that you're seeing is where the antenna goes, the base of the Chameleon SS25, the 25-foot antenna. It goes in there. And on the other side, that's where the SO239 connector is. So the braid of the coax, the shield, is what's going to be going up to here, to these little connectors where you can put in your ground radials. But then the center conductor is what goes to this nut and ultimately out here to the antenna. Well, with a 25-foot antenna, I wanted it to be simple. I didn't want to use guy wires or guy ropes or whatever. I don't have an awful lot of room in my backyard, at least in one or two of the directions, to have some solid setup with a guy wire setup. On the north and south, there's a fair amount of room. Still not a lot, but there's some. But on the east and west, there's very little to be able to get a good angle at those guy wires. It could be done if I had to, but I was looking for something that would hold the antenna, and it's a lightweight antenna. It's not extremely large. It's mostly just tall, so about 25 feet, or for those on the metric system, it's about 7 or 8 meters tall. And with that, the wind was relatively calm, only about 5 miles per hour or so, with maybe some gusts closer to 10 miles per hour. So that would be roughly 8 to 16 kilometers per hour. So not a lot of wind, but enough to where the antenna was flexing. And just like with a physics class, if you have a very long lever or lever, however you want to say it, then it doesn't take a lot of force on one end to generate a huge amount of force on another end. And so up at the tip of the antenna, the wind was catching it, even though it was a light wind, and the force was being exerted down here. And with that lock washer in place, what ended up happening is this was pushing that nut just far enough away from that insulator that not enough threads were able to grab on, even with it good and finger tight. Again, you don't want to over tighten that because of crushing the insulator, but even with it good and tight, there was enough leverage and twisting force to be able to pull the nut off of that SO239 connector adapter. Now, the threads of the antenna itself, those did not pull out, but the nut pulled out from the adapter. I'm glad, if something had to give, that it was that side and not the antenna side. And so thankfully, thank God, the antenna ended up gently being caught by some tree branches, and then the bottom of the antenna landed in a soft patch of the grass. So no significant damage, but I did notice that the threads were messed up a little bit with that adapter, so I'm going to have to keep an eye on that, and that is something that can be purchased separately if needed. However, I took the little washer out, retightened it, and now I'm utilizing more of the threads, and as far as how tight it feels and how easily it snugs up versus how easily it might come loose, I actually feel like it's a more solid connection than utilizing this lock washer on the nut. So time will tell, but if this is any indication, after that one QSO, the first QSO of the day last Sunday, having the antenna come off of the mount that way, I had all the rest of my QSOs and it stayed put, even though there was some stronger wind than I was expecting and the antenna flexed more than I was expecting at the beginning of that day. It actually stayed on there just fine. I went out and checked it a few times. It did very well. My dad thankfully helped me keep an eye on it, and it did all right. I was able to reach Japan and Louisiana in the United States and had some good long QSO time. So that turned out really, really well. So all that to say, sometimes when you're doing ham radio, something very simple can be the difference between staying on the air and not staying on the air. Now, when I go live, I'm hoping to talk about some simple ways that you can make your own antenna that don't require a tripod necessarily and don't even require a manufactured antenna. And that can keep it even more simple. I will give you just a brief idea of what I'm talking about. Now, just so you know, I don't have software on my computer that will easily allow me to share my screen and let you see me at the same time. However, I am going to be looking at some websites here from Home Depot, and I just want to call out that there is some copper pipe that you can get that would be 10 feet or about 3.3 meters. And you can get the 3/4 inch variety for a reasonable cost. Of course, prices change, but 10 feet for about $47. Or if you get a smaller version of that 10-foot pipe, you can get it for about $29. And you could even hook up pipes together and make a long vertical antenna. But if you need something shorter, like 10 feet, if that works great for you, especially if you're using like the 10-meter band or 12-meter bands, then even like the 15-meter band, 10 feet may be sufficient, especially with an antenna tuner. Whereas if you're needing to use the lower frequencies, or you want something that's going to help you get out a little bit better, if you could hook up a couple pipes together, that might be more ideal. But more about that to come. Also, Home Depot sells some really nice wire, even what they call hobby wire. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and bookmark a page for myself here. And that's just one example. There's other hardware stores out there, but I really like the variety and the cost. For example, you can get even, for example, 6-gauge solid copper wire, 25 feet of it for only $29. So think about the type of antenna you could make. I read somewhere that stranded or braided copper wire is going to be better for radiating RF because of the skin effect. So you may want to consider doing that as well. They also have at Home Depot some braided copper wire. So all sorts of great options. But just some things to think about. It's really nice when you can get something like that. And you can even make radials out of it and so forth. But a lot of great options, and some of them are relatively inexpensive. You could pay like $25 to $100 to make a really nice antenna with your own materials, versus something that might get you roughly the same signal performance that might cost all in $200 to even $2,000, depending on exactly what your setup is. If you're using a tower, which could be even much more, obviously, cost-wise. So it really depends on what route you want to take, and if you can hang a wire from a tree, or if you have to support it with some form of mast or tripod or whatever. But in any case, I'm looking forward to sharing more videos with you in the future, and I hope you all have a great week to come. This is AC7WH73.